All right. Welcome to our first workshop for grant season 2023 for CTE. Today, we're going to talk about the CTE Incentive Grant, Attachment 1, Self-Evaluation. And so this is actually more than just for the CTE Incentive Grant. It is required that you upload this if you are going to apply for K-12 SWP. That's the K-12 Strong Workforce Program that's offered through the Chancellor's Office. And that including if you are going to engage in a consortium application, which we will have another one this year. And so this is a great exercise to do as you enter grant season. We do expect K-12 SWP to be released as early as tomorrow, but if not, maybe hopefully in the next week. And so as you are diving into this, know that it will be helpful for either application. And feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go for those of you who are here live. And we will go from there. Let me just make sure. Yes, the recording is going. All right, so since this is our first kickoff, I also wanted to give a brief overview of the CTE incentive grant. And so what we have here is kind of an overview sheet. Our grant department has this template. So I worked with them on completing this. And so this just kind of gives you an overview of everything to expect with the CTE incentive grant, a lot of the links so that you don't have to dig through everything that the Department of Ed has. Things like the Department of Ed did release like their webinar and their slides, but it's in a random CDE box that you can only see if you maybe got the email. So I try to link everything here that you might need along the way so that as you apply, you have all of those at your fingertips. You also could consider making a copy. If you have a whole team, it's kind of nice to think about who's responsible for each portion of your grant application. And so here you can see who's responsible for even making your Google Drive folder and having, who is going to be submitting in PGMS, who is going to do each one of these attachments, and there might be a team of you. Or it might be that you're rolling solo for those of you who are maybe in smaller LEAs. So, this could help you just think about all the things that are coming up. Some of you may need to let your contract department know that you're going to route this. Some of you might be able to walk next door to your director or superintendent's office and have them sign in a few minutes. So it really depends on your system. But this may help you in thinking about your own application. As we get into CTEIG, there are a number of elements. Today, we'll be talking about this attachment 1, self-evaluation. Most of these are going to be uploaded into something called X files, and there's really specific directions on how to develop your PDF that you'll upload there. And you'll also need to go into PGMS for an online submission. I recommend that you are always ready to submit the day before. That way, if you have any questions or concerns, or maybe you get into PGMS and you're not already listed as the person for your LEA, then, which I recommend, go into PGMS now if you're new to this and make sure that you can get, be considered your LEA's CTE person so that you can do that submission later. You'll also want to pull your LCAP. You do have to have an LCAP that shows CTE as something that's a priority for your LEA. But college and career readiness works as well, right? So when you look through your LCAP, you'll highlight anywhere that it says CTE, anywhere that says college and career readiness, and you only include those pages. In fact, they will subtract points if you just dump the whole LCAP in there, because all they want to see is the pages that include CTE or college and career readiness. If you're in a consortium, you'll need to have your MOUs uploaded, evidence of participation in a SWP consortia when applicable. So you'll see these are some of the things that are outlined in the RFA for that upload. And you do have to sign the state assurances and certifications, but you don't give that to anyone. You just put it in a file, and then probably no one will ever ask you for it, but just in case, you'll have it on hand. So as you're thinking about CTE incentive grant, these are all the things you'll need to include. This document we're going to talk about today, like I said, is also part of the K-12 SWP process. So if you're not doing any of this CTEIG application, you're still going to want to go through this self-evaluation. It doesn't matter how many points you get on it for K-12 SWP, but you will need to upload that as part of either if you want to join our consortium or if you want to apply on your own. So either way, this is a great exercise for you to go through. There is scoring associated with the CTE incentive grant, and each attachment has a different score. So what we'll be looking at today, attachment 1 has 45 possible points, and you're going to want to hit 24. So what that means is score yourself very honestly the first round, and if you don't hit 24 points, go back and just like be a little more generous in a few places, because it's really not about scoring 45. If you scored 45, then why do you need the money, right? You're doing everything perfectly. But if you're under 24, that means that you're really not already in a space where you have developed pathways, and CTE incentive grant wants to incentivize your LEA to actually build those. And so you need to have something to build on. And so that's that 24 out of 25. You'll see the attachment 2 and attachment 3. These are budget related attachments. And so you do need minimum scores for those. And you can find all these different rubrics in the RFA. Your LCAP, again, you need to have at least one of the 2 possible points. And again, like I said, it says they will minus points if you add a whole bunch of random pages that they don't want to look at. And so overall, you'll need 27 points to be eligible for funding, and you self-grade yourself. And so you should be able to get there. You do have to provide that evidence to say that that score is the score that you have. Again, K-12 SWP requires you to upload this. It's part of the work that has been done at the state to align these 2 systems. However, there's no minimum score required for K-12 SWP. A lot of times that program is looking to support new program development, which means you don't already have to have a baseline in order to engage in that work. So when we get into attachment 1, I see, all right, why PGMS? I have a question, and these are great questions that we will never have answers to from the Department of Ed. And so as we dive in, luckily the PGMS component is actually pretty minimal. You're just putting in things like what your match amount is, and then it'll say how much you can apply for, which is half of your match, and things like that. So PGMS is pretty minimal, but I do recommend that you're in there a day or 2 before, because like mentioned in this direct message, it can be unstable. All right, so attachment 1, there's 10 eligibility standards, but some are divided into like an A and a B. So overall, that turns into 15 sections that you'll be evaluating your program around. Each section earns up to 3 points. You will have a rubric associated with each section separately. You need to score at least 24 out of 45 on attachment 1. And as we talked about, there's also minimums for your budgetary sections and your LCAP. But again, no minimum score required for K-12 SWP. One thing to note, if you are a middle school only LEA, you cannot apply for CTEIG alone. You can apply for it in a consortium with the high school your students feed into, because in order to apply for CTEIG, you do have to be submitting data around your CTE completers. So a lot of times our middle schools, even though you'll be filling out this particular attachment for CTEIG, the better space for middle schools tends to be in K-12 SWP, because you have a little bit more freedom in applying for that one, because it is not reliant on you turning in your completer data. All right, I will pause because we're going to dump in. If there are any questions, please let me know or share them in the chat. All right. So this outlines the minimum eligibility standards that are listed. And like I said, sometimes they're split into A and B. So this is really aligned to the 11 elements of a high quality pathway, which is part of some of the statewide driving factors for how we develop pathways. You'll hear people talk about the 12 elements versus the 11 elements because CTEIG is a legislated funding source and the 11 elements are mentioned in there. It will remain 11 elements until that legislation is updated. And so as we look at this, we're going to be looking at things like curriculum and instruction. You'll be thinking about how you're sequencing your courses and uploading them in CalPads, how you're providing career exploration and guidance opportunities, the support services that you provide, including counseling, student leadership development, which may be CTSOs, but there are also ways to give students leadership opportunities that are not your career technical student organizations or CTSOs. You'll talk about your alignment, how you're articulating and having partnerships with your post-secondary institutions. You will jump into your industry and labor partnerships. Hopefully you have a healthy advisory committee, but sometimes that's something that might be an area for growth for many districts. You are looking at access to work-based learning experiences, looking at out-of-school activities and competitions, which may also be aligned with those career technical student organizations or other leadership opportunities for students. You may be looking at your labor market demands and what labor market information is driving your pathway development. It should be also informed by regional plan of the local consortium. Leading, if it leads to industry recognized credentials, certificates, or other post-secondary areas, that's also a plus. Obviously, we want them to be staffed by skilled teachers and faculty. You want to make sure that you're providing professional development for your CTE teachers. And that's interesting because in this space, it's not just sending them to conferences, but it can also be sending them to industry during the summer to just spend time working in that space. And those are educator externships often. And then finally, making sure that students with exceptional needs can participate in all programs. So for each one of those, there's going to be a 2-page spread in this document. And so in the 2-page spread, you're going to find 5 different elements. First, up here, you have a scoring rubric, and I recommend that you sit down with your team and anyone who's involved in CTE and at least kind of do these first 2 boxes together and just say, okay, where are we? Are we not yet in practice? Are we emerging practice? Quality practice, exemplary practice, right? And you'll see that rubric outlines what each one of those means for that particular standard. And then it wants evidence. And you say, well, what does evidence look like? Luckily, they have a little box that tells you what are some examples of evidence you may have on file. Below, you'll have some LEA comments. You'll list your areas of strength. And then this last box is where you put all of the improvement opportunities, right? So anywhere when you're doing this and you're like, oh, there's areas for growth, this is really what you're going to fund. This is your funding opportunities, your plans, everything you want to fund with this grant should be in that last box. So if we go a little bit more in depth, what I say your starting point is to work through the scoring rubric as a team. If you have a team, list any evidence on file, elaborate with the comments, and list your strength, right? So don't worry about that last box until you've kind of gone through everything else together. I put together a collaborative version right here. And so while you will eventually submit this in a PDF format, right? So if you look, let's see if I will have that on the overview sheet. It's linked in a lot of places. So eventually you will be submitting it where you're going to paste it into all the boxes and you're going to click the boxes and you're going to paste everything in here. But we all know that's really hard to go through and do collaboratively. And so I recommend that you take, this is the Google Docs version of that exact thing. You can click make a copy right here and then drop it somewhere so that you can work on it, so you can get colleagues to work on it, you can have other people look through it, and then this is a helpful way for you to be able to go through this process, right? So you're going to go through as a team, and if you don't have a lot of time as your whole team, you can just roll on through and just do the rubric with everybody. You could probably do that in an hour. And then you start building where your evidence is, and making comments on that and talking about your strengths, right? So when we look at last year, Kristen Areno did this webinar and she graciously shared her slides. And so she has some examples of where she went through with her team scoring rubric, right? So she says, for 1A, curriculum and instruction is aligned to CTE model curriculum standards. So here they say all pathways have that alignment. There's integration that's clearly demonstrated in all pathways. So probably in their course outlines, they're talking about their ELA and math practices and how that overlaps with CTE. Everything's aligned. And so what is that evidence? So here is the evidence that are suggested, and here's the evidence that Coronado has on file. Or they have CTE course outlines, they have lesson plans, they have a syllabi aligned to the model curriculum standards. They do have an alignment matrix that has been reviewed by their community college partners, right? Sometimes those reviews can happen during an advisory meeting. And so here they have that advisory committee meetings where those courses are reviewed. So while it's hard because advisory meetings are required if you have Perkins funds. If you don't have Perkins funds, some people, don't feel like they have to have really formal advisory, but you can see here, it is an essential part of a high quality pathway. And so having kind of minutes and notes from your advisory meetings, and advisory meetings are made out of your industry partners, usually who are advising your program. It can also include your post-secondary partners who run the CTE programs, maybe at your community college or an aligned program at the university. And so you want to have that nice feedback from them to ensure that the curriculum is meeting the needs of our students and their future. All right, then you're going to jump in and you're going to give some comments. And so you're going to overview this standard, right, which in this case, 1A around curriculum for programs at your LEA. And LEA means lead educational agency. If you haven't heard that terminology, it's kind of like the word district, but we have a lot of folks who aren't districts, right? Our charters aren't considered districts, but they're still LEAs. So overview of how this lives in your LEA, right? And so that would be across all of your schools in the same organization. You want to make comments that the grant reader may take into consideration. This is mostly facts, right? Because you're going to have another box where you're going to talk about strengths. I will say when I go through this with our juvenile court and community schools, it feels a little bit repetitive sometimes. And so here you start seeing, here's the teachers are experts in these areas. And here, one of the strengths that they had was that they're changing their day to a 4x4 schedule, which allows them to take additional courses, but this is restructuring. And so they're seeing that they're going to need to fund some restructuring and some curriculum work aligned to those changes, right? So this could be facts about your specific programs in your schools along the way. When you get into areas of strength, here's great highlights, right? Because a lot of times your funders want to know that you are putting in the effort, that you are building a pathway, and that if they fund new things, that it will build even stronger pathways for students. And so here, these areas of strength at the school, they have a lot of teachers who are participating in the industry they're teaching in. Right. And that's great because it keeps the curriculum really up to date, high quality and relevant. You can see here that they're getting into their advisory meetings again, which were aligned up above. They also talk about A through G and how their CTE is aligned and approved as A through G programs. And so you can see you're just giving these areas of strength as it aligns. And I'm going to go back a couple of slides here. As it aligns to these standards, right? So if you say it's aligned to the model curriculum standards and it has integration of academic standards and everything is aligned to industry, well, that's what we just talked about. So basically the next three boxes, which, right, scoring rubric and those three boxes, they're there to say, look, here's the score and here's why we scored it this way. Now we get into that box 5. And that's where we're going to create improvement plans and look for opportunities to improve. Here's the language straight from the RFA, which is saying, you know, you have 1,500 characters. You need to include industry sector and pathway plans for improvements or systems or processes that need to be put in place, right? So if you have a graphic design program and you need to build a new curriculum for that, or you need new software for that, or whatever it is, that needs to go here. And everything you want money for has to be in this box, right? So the plan should explicitly state proposed services and or needs in the budget narrative worksheet. That's attachment number 2. And so here's an example from Coronado and how they did this box. And so they're going through in every pathway offered. So each course will undergo course review. They're going to look at A through G approval, things like that. Now they're looking at this specific pathway. They're going to list that pathway and what they want to do for it. The software and systems development pathway will add a cybersecurity capstone class to expand and enhance the pathway. The teacher is going to attend Project Lead the Way training, PLTW, and will follow that curriculum to ensure CTE standards are met. So here's where they're trying to fund the curriculum and the training for this teacher. And so they're listing it here. And then later they'll put that in their budget. So everything that's in your budget needs to be listed here. So as you're going through, you're thinking about your budget, I'll say, one thing that kind of we start out with when we budget for our juvenile court and community schools is the fact that we always want to make sure our grant funded teachers are well funded to teach. Because once you start paying for a teacher out of your regular white budget funds, your LCAP, you can't pay them out of a grant later because that becomes supplanting, right? So as long as they're all paid for by a grant, we can continue to pay for them by a grant. So we like to step back and look at all of our teachers and make sure that they're all funded. And so I might see here, oh, I really, I have a grant that's ending maybe in culinary, which means that one of my plans would be to continue funding, right, that teacher in that program. So really think about what you need, but you can't then just budget for that. You also have to go back and figure out where it lives here and add that. Our applications here, our budgetary folks actually like to list out the funding items that we're funding here. So this is how we fill ours out, where we look at here are the kind of budget narrative matches for the exact programs that we have here. So we are very, and we highlight and do different colors in our Google Doc, and then we just cut and paste the boringness into that PDF at the end. So this may be a little bit of a more extreme example, but for us, this really helps us align our budget narrative to attachment 1's opportunity and plans box. Finally, it's going to give you a chance to talk about unique conditions. And so each of our districts, each of our LEAs has unique conditions that should be taken into consideration. Are you in a rural area? Do you have unique programs that change the kinds of costs or expenses that you're undergoing? Are you bringing in something new? And so that's a unique condition this year, right? So anything that may affect the application. So here you can see that Coronado is going to talk about their military population and the fact that that means there's a lot of transition. They have kids who come in and out any time of the year because there's a lot of movement for their families, right? They also have a school within a school. They have the Coronado School of the Arts, which has some unique program opportunities and some school students outside of their district who come in for those programs. For our juvenile court and community school, we have unique conditions around the actual demographics of our students. We have students who are in our court schools where there are significant restrictions on the kinds of equipment or internet access that we can provide, right? So these are unique conditions that we see in our program. And so as you're thoughtful about what kinds of conditions you could have, this is kind of your last chance to say, hello, people who are giving us money. If you weren't sure you should give us money, here's some unique reasons why we are providing supports for students who really need this, right? So that is one final space where you have an opportunity to add your unique conditions. So that is the whole kind of overview of attachment 1. The Department of Ed did give a webinar, and so I pulled some of the relevant slides from their webinar that I felt like applied to this, particularly talking about those minimum eligibility requirements, which we already talked about. FAQ number 4 from theirs, I will say it feels really repetitive because in attachment 1, it says it requires us to list pathways for every question. Do we have to do that? The Department of Ed says, no, the pathways are entered in PGMS. But it does say to enter the pathways. So we tend to just have like a really small piece that we cut and paste. But this makes me wonder if we may not need to do so much listing of pathways because it takes up a lot of the word count that we have a minimum on. FAQ number 6, does the match have to support a specific pathway program, right? Everything should be apparent that matching funds are supporting the pathway or the larger CTE program. So when we talk about match, which that's a future webinar, as you're thinking about the program evaluation though, in this case, all the money you spend on CTE, that can be a match for the CTE incentive grant. When you get into K-12 SWP, they like the match to apply specifically to the program that you are building. And so you have to be thoughtful about how you might allocate your match differently for K-12 SWP and use the portion of your match that aligns to that grant there. And then here, when you're talking about your strengths, these are all the monies that you're already spending in CTE. And so that's where your match lives as part of the high quality CTE program evaluation. Again, I mentioned this, why are we not using the 12 essential elements? And that has to do with the CTEIG legislation. So ask your legislator, but really it doesn't matter too much. They're very similar. And then finally, there was a question about SWP collaboration. And so because this aligns to minimum eligibility standard 7B, there is a document that it suggests that you submit as evidence. 9:29, I did make it in 30 minutes, which is quite impressive if you know me. So this is the first of many webinars that we have. This scrolls when you get into our grants document here, and it can update. So later today, I will post this recording right here in this box, but you can see there are many opportunities ahead to join in for similar workshops where we'll just kind of help take one little bite out of the application at a time. You can spend a little time doing that piece. And then when you're ready for the next component, then we'll be here with the next piece of this puzzle. So take a look at that. And if you are interested in attending some of those, let me also just drop this in the chat. For those of you who, you're here, so you probably do have access to this document, but that way you know, and you can start thinking about how you might want to calendar the ones that you're most interested in. We will be having some in-person sessions. The September 6th CTE Leaders Network kickoff will be at the Comic-Con Museum in person. I will have a little owl, which is a digital thing that records it, but I know it's a little bit hard to attend an in-person session remotely, but we will have that available. And in that afternoon, we encourage you to stick around if you want to dive a little bit more deeply into data. And so as you go through, here are some additional sessions that are coming up. And so at this point, we'll just switch over to a Q&A session. But I will thank you for attending our first workshop in the series and look forward to seeing the magic that happens as you fund your programs in the coming year. Thank you. All right, I'm going to stop recording.